Welcome back to the fourth and the final day of the Aster Sewalong. The first couple steps are for if you are leaving your dress or your top unlined, like I am for this dress view. If you are lining your dress or your top, you can go ahead and skip ahead a couple steps. So we're going to finish the bottom of this facing. You can do this in a couple different ways. You could just serge it and keep it super simple, but I am going to finish it by pressing the whole bottom edge of the facing down, wrong sides touching, by 1/4 of an inch. Once I do that once, I'm going to go ahead and turn it on itself again by another 1/4 of an inch and then stitch it. Okay, so it should look something like this. This is a good time to give the neckline of your dress or your top a really good press. Now we do want to keep this facing tucked to the inside of our dress. It can be really annoying when facings are flapping out all the time. So what we will do is we'll do a little line of stitching in the side seam that will go ahead and go through the main dress and also the facing. You can do a stitch in the ditch, which is pretty much invisible on the right side of your dress, or you could also just hand tack it to the seam allowances if you want it to be completely invisible. I went ahead and I tacked it in place with a pin just to keep everything in line. I'm going to do the stitch in the ditch version, mostly because it is fastest, and also I just don't worry about things being visible at the underarm seam. Okay, now that that is done, we are going to move on to the versions where we are lining your top or your dress. So go ahead and grab your lining pieces as well as your main top or dress if you are adding a lining. So take your front and your back lining pieces, and with right sides together, you're going to match up the notches. That's a good way to tell which of the sides is the side seam, also the top and the bottom. So line up the notch on the back with the dart on the front and pin that, and then we are going to stitch with right sides together at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, now you're going to press those seam allowances open, and if you're like me and you forgot to press your seam allowances open on your main top or dress, you can go ahead and do that now too. So now it's time to attach the lining to the facing. So with the facing extended up and away from the main top or dress, we are going to pin the upper edge of the lining to the lower edge of the facing with right sides touching. So you're going to match the ends and the side seams. Notice that there is a very slight curve along kind of like the bust area on the front, and so you're going to be pinning opposite curves together. So it might feel a teeny bit awkward right in that area when you are pinning that together, but it should all match up. And once you have that all pinned, we're going to go over to our sewing machine and we are going to stitch that at a normal 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, it should look something like this. Now, depending on how thick your fabric is, you might find that you want to grade the seam a bit or clip it along the slightly curved area around the bust. That's up to you. I normally find that I don't. Now we are going to press the seam allowances at this time. I like to press them up towards the facing and away from the lining. Okay, it should be looking something like this now. So that is the end of attaching the lining. So these next few steps where we finish out kind of like the button band and the hem, these are going to be for all views, whether you are adding a lining or not, whether you're doing a dress or a top. So we're going to begin by pressing in those little edges where those little corners are by 1/4 of an inch. So we'll do that along the entire hem. And then we'll also do it along the center back edges, which also is right along the edge of that interfacing for the button band. And then at the center back, we are going to pull the facing up and away from the main back. And then we're going to fold the center back edge back with right sides touching by 1 inch, which also is along that interfacing edge. Once again, the facing is going to extend by about 1/2 an inch into that button band area and will be sandwiched in the middle. So we're going to go and stitch at 1/2 an inch down from that top edge. And that's just going to finish that corner off for us along the top edge. Okay, it should look something like this. Now, just kind of set that little portion aside and we are going to miter the corners at this point. So at the bottom back edges, you're going to pull the 2 corners together, right sides touching, and you are going to pin right there. And then you will stitch that at 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, now go ahead and trim those seam allowances down, and then you're going to turn both that mitered corner and also that top corner right side out. It's nice to use a point turner so you can get a really nice point, but that is going to turn in both the button band and the hem at the same time. Take your time pressing in the button band and the hem. Both of them should be 1 inch. So I like to measure it and just make sure that everything is nice and even and crisp. Now note that if you added a lining, that the lining is going to extend into that button band and to that hem by about 1/2 an inch past the folded edge. Also, that facing will also tuck in by 1/2 an inch. So carefully go around, making sure that like nothing is pulling or puckering, that the lining is laying flat. Give everything a good press, like I said, and pin it in place. And then to secure the button band and the hem, we are going to stitch it just inside of that 1 inch fold, so at about 7/8 of an inch. You're going to do this in one long line of stitching, pivoting at the center back corners. Okay, so we are almost done. So the last thing that we need to do is we need to add our buttons and our buttonholes. So you should have this buttonhole guide, and so you're going to go ahead and place that on top of the left back and use that to mark your buttonholes. I'm going to use a Crayola marker, but you can use whatever marking tool that you prefer. And then once you have those all marked, you're going to go over to your sewing machine and you are going to sew those buttonholes. And then after you sew them, we are going to open up the buttonholes. Now once those buttonholes are opened, you are going to put the left side over the right at the back, and you are going to mark your button placement. So the button placement should be towards the top of each of your buttonholes. And then I like to use a little glue stick to secure my buttons in place, and then I sew them on my machine, but of course you can sew them on by hand as well. And that's it. Now your Aster is done. So give everything a good press, clip any loose threads, button it up, and I hope that you love your Aster and that you will wear it proudly.